On? Is now, sorry. Okay, if you have a Bible with you, I'd like you to turn with me to Mark chapter 6, and we're going to start with our reading this evening. So we're reading from Mark chapter 6, and we're starting to read from verse 30 through to verse 44. Now, it's headed in my Bible, Jesus Feeds the 5,000, but don't worry, that's not the title of this evening's sermon. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. He said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it is already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him that that would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. And he also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. Now, other than Jesus' ministry in Galilee, the feeding of the 5,000 is actually the only incident recorded in all 4 Gospels prior to the events of Easter week. But as I alluded in the title of the passage, this is not the subject of tonight's sermon. Important though that is spiritually, what we're going to focus on is verse 31, which says, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." In essence, Jesus is inviting us to go with him by ourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. And so although the sermon is given the title "Invitation to Withdraw," it could also be subtitled as an antidote to spiritual overwhelm. So before Dave brings us the application of the message this evening, my focus is really just to set some of the background and the context of the passage. Now, if we look further back through Mark chapter 6, we'll see in verses 7 and 12, which I'm not going to read for you, but you can read it yourselves when you get home, that Jesus has just sent out the 12 in pairs. And effectively, that is their first mission trip. And they're now coming back to Jesus, excited, who wouldn't be, to tell Jesus everything that had happened. Now, we know at this point in Jesus' ministry, he's been ministering in Capernaum. Now, that is located on the northwest side of what we know today as Lake Galilee. The feeding of the 5,000 in this passage and the events surrounding it, according to Luke, however, take place in Bethsaida. Now, Bethsaida is actually located on the northeastern side of the lake. And if we can have a first slide, please, that will help you to have some idea of what we're talking about. So we have, obviously, Bethsaida at the top there on the northeastern shore. We have Capernaum on the northwestern shore. What's not very clear on that slide under the red dot is actually the River Jordan flowing down into the top of the lake. And the River Jordan, of course, separated the 2 halves of the lake. And you couldn't get across it at the top of the lake. It was too wide. Now, if we look at the account in Matthew's Gospel, we read that Jesus has actually just learnt of the death of his cousin John the Baptist at this point, who had been executed by Herod. So consequently, Jesus is very aware of that. He's overwhelmed by grief. The disciples have come to him, reporting all they've said and done. They need food, they're tired, they're hungry. And we start to get a picture of what's really going on here. Lots of things happening. And Jesus, after all, is fully human, is also fully God, experiences the whole range of human emotions. So Jesus, in his wisdom, knows that actually now's the time to actually withdraw and get some rest. The point is this: what happens after a spiritual high is very often there is a spiritual low. For another example, we can look at 1 Kings chapter 19, and if we read the passage there, we would see that Elijah, after defeating the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, flees to Horeb and hides in a cave. And this, of course, is after he's received death threats from Jezebel on his life. Now, in that case, you could say that Elijah is suffering from some kind of spiritual depression. And yet he does the best thing possible at that point. He retreats into the wilderness and the silence and into the presence of God at Mount Sinai. And that's the place, of course, where God then restores his strength. What does spiritual overwhelm look like, you might ask? Well, this is the point where probably it's best if I just share a brief testimony with you, and hopefully that will give you some idea of what it looks like, because it's going to be different for each one of us. So, around about November 2022, I started to feel very overwhelmed at work. I was trying to do too much work, basically. I was doing lots of things and starting to make lots of mistakes. Classic sign, you might say, of someone about to get stressed. I had an assistant who'd been working with me for 6 months, but she'd gone off sick. So there we go. I'm trying to do two people's jobs, and that's before I'd done anything else. On top of that, I then had to deal with a significant complaint that had been referred to me to investigate. And as if that wasn't enough, on top of that, I then had to deal with some major governance issues that cropped up. And in the midst of dealing with those governance issues, found myself very much having to apply the wisdom of James about being a peacemaker to two opposing views that were going on with some colleagues at work. The point put simply is this: most of us will cope with one problem or another at any given time. And we'll do that without too much difficulty. You might even thrive on having a crisis thrown in for good measure. But then if you pile another issue on top of that, all of a sudden things start to come down like a deck of cards. Well, that was probably the place where I was starting to feel I was heading towards, and I knew it was coming quickly, and I needed to stop and go to God at that point. Now, as I moved through 2023, it wasn't an easy year last year, but actually God started to provide a way through the situation of overwhelm that I'd been walking. And one of the ways he answered prayer was to bring a new assistant along to my office, who was actually very administratively gifted, was able to help shift some of the burden of the work that I'd been carrying at that point. But again, the main point is this: when we feel that sense of overwhelm, it's a good indicator that actually the antidote really is to withdraw and seek the presence of God. You might be wondering, well, what is overwhelm? Well, quite simply, when I was researching this, I came to the conclusion there's probably 4 points. Overwhelm can be physical, it can be mental, it can be emotional, and it can be spiritual. It could be any one of those 4 things, or it could be any combination of those 4 things. And it can manifest itself in different forms. But here's just a few examples I jotted down, and some of these might be helpful to you. So, firstly, it could be the loss of a loved one. It could also be the loss of a friendship, a favorite pet, a job, a home. Maybe a dream or a lifelong ambition suddenly bites the dust. All of those can have a profound effect on our well-being. It could also be something like a money problem, struggling with divorce or a challenging relationship, betrayal by someone you love or a friend, being the victim of a crime or a road accident. For some, it might be an unforeseen health diagnosis. The list goes on, but actually the important thing again is that what triggers a sense of overwhelm for one person may not be the same thing that triggers it for another. Everybody is different. We all have a different level of resilience, but ultimately, when we get to that place of being overwhelmed, we need to learn to go to the presence of God. And Psalm 55, verse 22, puts it very simply. It says, "Cast your cares onto the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous fall." Now, moving on, the next question, of course, is where is Bethsaida, and why did the crowds follow Jesus? As I was researching this, and obviously we've got the map here to help so you can see the geographical location, there are actually 2 Bethsaidas in the Bible. And I didn't know this, but as I was researching, where we think Bethsaida is that Jesus was heading to was not actually on the shores of Lake Galilee per se. It was actually a place 2 miles up the north of the River Jordan to a place called Bethsaida Julias. As I say, it's about 2 miles north of the Lake of Galilee. It's called the Sea of Galilee on this particular map. And it was located on the eastern side of the River Jordan. At that location, scholars believe there was a large plain, and it was to this large plain that Jesus was heading with his disciples, and adjacent to this plain was a range of hills that Jesus had intended to retreat to with the disciples. And of course, he meets the people as he gets to that point, so he doesn't actually get up into the hills at that point. Now, given that the Lake Galilee is only 4 miles across at its northern tip, the people who saw Jesus withdraw by boat from Capernaum sought to follow him eastwards, and of course, when they came to that crossing point on the River Jordan, there was Jesus. The people caught up with him, or the people were already there. Jesus comes in by boat and goes, "Oh, now I've got compassion. There's loads of people here. I need to feed 5,000 people." But anyway, that's the meeting point, is actually this place 2 miles north of the Lake of Galilee at that point. Now, some commentators, particularly those looking at the account in John's Gospel, think that the feeding of the 5,000 actually comes a few weeks before Passover, and it's just as many Jews are actually starting to make their way down to Jerusalem. If we can have a second slide, please. So again, I've just put this up just so you can see the context of where Galilee is, and Lake Galilee at the top there. You've got Decapolis on the eastern shore, and Samaria, of course, on the western shore, which many Jews did not like. So, of course, they would go through the crossing point at Bethsaida at the top of the Lake Galilee there, down the eastern side through Decapolis, rather than go down the western side through Samaria. And so, consequently, if it is a few weeks before Passover and people are starting that journey, you've got a bigger crowd perhaps than normal, and Jesus encounters them and has compassion. So we can surmise then from the reading of the passage that actually Jesus was dealing with grief. He was dealing obviously with reports from his disciples. He's hungry, they're tired, and so all of these things coming together, Jesus has this sense of, no, actually the important thing now is come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. And that's, of course, what Jesus seeks to do. Now, of course, all of this sets the stage for the miraculous encounter of the feeding of the 5,000, and certainly in the accounts in John's Gospels, you have the deeper meaning of the bread of life, and Jesus teaching on spiritual food in John's Gospel. Now, that's all, of course, another sermon. So at this point, I'm going to jump off and let Dan lead us in our next song, and then Dave is going to come and bring the application of our passage.
Katie, I'm going to change the song and put In the Secret in, which is down on the waiting list. Just as Robert was sharing there, I am someone who loves having time by myself. I thrive off it. I can't do many people most of the time, so I like my little quiet places. I could feel what he was trying to say there in what Jesus was wanting. Just a bit of time to reset, a little bit of time to just focus in, a little bit of time to just breathe. We're going to do this song in the secret, but if you're wanting to just breathe, reset, refocus, feel free to just sit or stand quietly. If you're in a place where you want to sing, that's fine, we'll sing. But we've just got 3 or 4 minutes here where this song's on before Dave comes, where you can just digest that first part. It's like going for a big dinner. Digest your first course and get ready for the second course. And we'll see where that takes us. I'll invite you to just do what you feels right. In the secret, in the quiet place, in the stillness you are there. In the secret, in the quiet hour I wait only for you, 'cause I want to know you more. I want to know you. I want to hear your voice. I want to know you more. I want to touch you. I want to see your face. I want to know you more. I am reaching for the highest goal, that I might receive the prize. Pressing onward, pushing every hindrance aside, out of my way, 'cause I want to know you more. I want to know you. I want to hear your voice. I want to know you more. I want to touch you. I want to see your face. I want to know you more. I'm reaching for the highest goal, that I might receive the prize. Pressing onward, pushing every hindrance aside, out of my way, 'cause I want to know you more. I want to know you. I want to hear your voice. I want to know you more. I want to touch you. I want to see your face. I want to know you more. I want to know you. I want to hear your voice. I want to know you more. I want to touch you. I want to see your face. I want to know you more. I want to touch you. I want to see your face. I want to know you more.
that uh, that expresses quite a lot of some of the things I want to say tonight. I want to know you more. That's the whole purpose of retreat or withdrawal, to know God more. So that's quite an appropriate song to lead into tonight. I'd like to pray just to start off with. The prayer that I'm going to pray is based on Psalm 27. And it's a prayer used by the Northumbria community, who I will say a little bit about in a moment. In the shadow of your wings, I will sing your praises, O Lord. The Lord is my light, my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the refuge of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? In the shadow of your wings, I will sing your praises, O Lord. One thing I ask of the Lord, One thing I seek, to dwell in the presence of my God, to gaze on your holy place. In the shadow of your wings I will sing your praises, O Lord. I believe I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Oh, wait for the Lord. Have courage and wait. Wait for the Lord. In the shadow of your wings I will sing your praises, O Lord. Well, Rob's introduced our topic tonight by giving us a little glimpse into the biblical reasons for retreat and some physical and emotional reasons why we need to withdraw, to spend that time. When Pastor Andy asked me to speak this evening, he asked me to share about some of the retreats that I've been on and to bring out some principles for our lives, our everyday lives. The idea of going on a retreat or withdrawing from everyday life is as old as Christianity. In fact, it's older. It's not just Christianity that has people that withdraw from everyday life. Other religions also have that. But what we're looking at here tonight is the invitation that Jesus gave to his disciples. Come away with me. Come away with me to a quiet place. They needed rest. They needed physical rest. They'd just been on this mission trip, as Rob talked about, and they were full of excitement, and they were telling Jesus all about it and saying, okay, let's take some time to talk about this. Come away with me to a quiet place, have a chat, tell me all the things that you've experienced, tell me all the questions you've got, and I will give you answers. Rob talked about how the people would have crowded on the shore, and so there was a big crowd of people when they got there before the disciples. But you know, when they was in that boat, they were in control of how long it took to get there. And Jesus, I think, might have said to them, look, they've got to get there before us anyway. Let's slow down a little bit and just take our time. You need some physical rest, you guys. Have a chat to me while you're in the boat. But you know, what we're talking about is not just a physical rest. There's a spiritual element as well. Now, of course, we need physical rest. And one of the ways we get that physical rest is to go away on holiday. And if physical rest is something you need, then get on that plane. Go and take a break. There's nothing wrong with having a holiday. Go to wherever it is you go to. Sit on a beach. Enjoy the local food. See the local sights. Ride a roller coaster. Ride a camel. Whatever it is you want to do when you're on that holiday, enjoy that experience and have a good rest. But that's not the kind of rest I'm talking about tonight. There's nothing wrong with what I've just said. Those are really enjoyable things to do. What I'm talking about tonight is that physical rest and spiritual input as well. We are having a physical rest, and at the same time, we're having that rest with God. We're withdrawing to spend time with him. It's both physical and spiritual refreshment. The retreats I've been on have been with a group called the Northumbria Community. And it's an experience that I first went on in 2019. In 2018, my father died at the start of 2018. And throughout that year, I felt a lot of pressure. There were other things happened as well which really devastated my life. A relationship that I thought I had that wasn't. Things happened to me in my own personal life which were really hard to take. I had pressure at home, pressure at work. And at the start of 2019, I needed a break. I knew I needed to get away. I wanted to run away, if you have to be honest. So I had a look at a few options. And I have an interest in Celtic Christianity. Celtic Christianity is the indigenous Christianity of the British Isles. It originated with people like St. Patrick, St. Columba in Ireland and Scotland, and was a main player in the evangelisation of the north of England. So I had that interest. And I'm also interested in history. And one of the secular history books I've been reading at the time was about King Oswald of Northumbria. And so I thought to myself, I want to go and visit the place that this guy went to. I want to walk in the footsteps of King Oswald. I want to walk in the footsteps of St. Aidan. And the Northumbria community is obviously based in that part of England. I thought, well, I can actually combine the two things here. I can combine my love of history and my interest in Celtic spirituality, and I can get away and have a break, have a retreat, and find out more about these things I'm looking at. So I had a chat with Pastor John Sainsbury and Sue, and I found out that they'd actually visited the Northumbria community and had a retreat there. And they were very, very encouraging for me to go on this retreat. So I did do. I spent some time there. I visited the places. But the most beneficial thing that I had was I had that physical rest, and I had the chance to deepen my relationship with God. I've been on other retreats since. I went on a retreat after the lockdown had finished, and God did something really remarkable that week. One or two of you might know that I used to be terrified of butterflies. And when we went to Cambodia, I know David Elliott's laughing at me now because he used to say, "It's just a butterfly, Dave. Don't worry. You've been through the Cambodian forests where you've got snakes and tarantulas and all sorts of nasty things which could really do you harm, and you've not batted an eyelid. A butterfly lands on you, you go mad." I was absolutely terrified of them things. But on that retreat, I went to visit St. Cuthbert's Cave. I took with me some of the information that the Northumbria community give you. A little bit of information about what's there, some prayer resources, some suggested activities that you can do while you're there. And I got in my car, parked up in the car park. It's about a mile hike to get to St. Cuthbert's Cave. And I walked. And there were thousands and thousands of butterflies all flying around me. And I never bothered. In fact, I started walking up to them to take a closer look, which is something that I would have never have thought of doing. And after a little while, it dawned on me what I was doing. I thought, hang on, Dave, you're supposed to be frightened of these things. And you're going up to take a closer look. And when I got back to the retreat centre in near Felton, I was talking to Catherine Askew, who's the leader of the Northumbria community at the moment, and I was telling her what happened, and she thought it was hilarious. A man terrified of butterflies. But God did something really remarkable. He took that fear away. And I believe that time, God started something which he's built on in each retreat that I've been on since. My desires at the moment are to go deeper and deeper with God. I've planned to go on another retreat in April, and I believe that one's going to build on the ones that I've been on before. So what does a retreat look like? Well, I can only speak about the ones that I've been on with the Northumbria community. I know other people in this church have been on retreats at various different places, and their experiences will be different to the ones that I've had. Different place, a different setting, a different way of doing things, and God will have done something to them which is unique to them. So when I go on retreat, God's dealing with David Ronson. If you go if you take time to go on a retreat, God will be dealing with you. What God does for you will be unique to you. Okay, you will have your experience. I will have whatever God has for me. You will have whatever God has for you. So the retreats that I've been on, what do they look like? Well, when you get there, you have an evening meal. You join in with the evening prayers. And you get an introduction to the week. At 9 o'clock, you'll have what they call compline, which is a night prayer. And then the house is in silence until after morning prayers the following morning. When you wake up, there's not a sound in the entire place because everything is silent. You go for your breakfast at 8 o'clock, and being in the dining room with other people in silence is quite a weird thing when you first do it. Nobody's talking to each other. Everybody's just eating in silence. And it does feel quite strange, but after a little while, once you've done it a couple of times, it actually has some meaning to it. Because you're using that time to think about the things that you've been experiencing on the retreat. Things that you've learned. And it gives you that time to think things over in the silence that is there. At 9 o'clock, they have morning prayer. And silence ends, you can now start talking to other people. The morning prayer starts with these words. One thing I have asked of the Lord, this is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, and to seek him in his temple. That's based on Psalm 27, verse 4. And that's the desire of the community and the people on the retreat. It's stated right at the start of every day. Lord, I want to be in your presence. I want to hear from you this evening, this day. The morning prayer happens. You'll go on a retreat activity for the morning. Then at 12 o'clock, there will be midday prayer, followed by lunch at 1 o'clock. And then in the afternoon, retreat activities or free time. And at 4:30, you have that glorious time of the day that they call kettle time. You can sit down and have a brew and have a chat with other people and experience and learn about what each other has been experiencing on the retreat. At around about 5:15, there's evening prayer or communion. They'll have communion together at least once during the week when you're there. And that's followed by the evening meal. And then whatever activities are going on in the evening, and then compline night prayer at 9 o'clock. The house goes into silence once more until after morning prayer the following day. There's various activities you can do on site. Some of the retreats will include some teaching sessions where somebody will give a talk, explain something, and that can quite often be coupled with a visit to a local place connected with Christianity. The one that I went on last March, we went to Lindisfarne, we visited Bamborough, we visited a place called Alnmouth, where there is a cross, and we sat by the cross and ate our lunch. And that cross marks the spot where St. Cuthbert was badgered into becoming Bishop of Lindisfarne. There's quite a lot of inspiration that you can get from these things. Because as you take part and listen to the talks, there's also times to pray and reflect and think about what God is saying. You can go and visit their library. There's quite a big library there, and loads of books, and somebody that likes to read, it's a fascinating room for me. Go in and take a book off the shelf and read it for a little while. And each of those books contains something which is inspirational. Sometimes you might have to pull out 2 or 3 just to find one which speaks to you. But it's worth having a look. And then there's the gardens. And these gardens, you can have a walk around and use the prayer spaces that are there in the garden. They have a prayer labyrinth in the garden, which you can walk around. A prayer labyrinth is basically a route that you can walk and pray. And the idea is it symbolizes a pilgrimage. And the aim of a pilgrimage is to meet God. You walk around it. When you get to the center, it says that God is central. God is central to your life. That's what it's symbolizing. My friend Jim Bailey, who I met on the first retreat I went to, he's a former Pentecostal pastor, and he stepped down because he wanted to pursue other things. And he became president of the Great Britain Labyrinth Society. So he was telling me all about what this represents and all the things you can do with these things and pray. And he basically makes his living out of teaching about it and making little labyrinths for people to use in the quiet times. But he said something to me which was very important. He said there are a lot of tools here, a lot of things you can use. Some of them you'll find useful, and some of them you won't find useful. He said, I've told you about these labyrinths, but if you don't find it useful, put it to one side and use something else instead. Now, from a man that makes his living out of labyrinths, that was quite a big thing for him to say. But his desire is that people get to know God. That is the most important thing to Jim, that you get to know God. And if what he can provide you with helps you, fine. But if it's no good to you, don't use it. There's also the chapel. You can go and sit in the chapel. If you ever see the chapel at Nether Springs, when you look at it on the outside, it looks like an old, wrecked farm building. But when you get inside, people have prayed and prayed and worshipped God in that place, that you just feel the presence of God there. It's nothing to look at from the outside, but God is there in the building. And you can feel it when you go in. It's difficult to explain, but you just know that you're there in the presence of God. At least that's what I felt. And I know other people that have used it have felt the same. Of course, you can go off-site, take your lunch with you, and you can visit places of historical and spiritual interest. The community will give you information and suggested prayers to use while you're there. And there's also local walks you can go on. So, what do you want from a retreat? And how do you go about it? You could go on an organised retreat, as I've just described. Some retreats are structured, some have a theme, some are unstructured, where you just make use of the facilities, information packs, and join in with the prayers of the place. You don't have to go all the way to Northumberland. There are some fairly close by. There's Whalley Abbey, for example, where you could go to Hello Grange. That's a form of retreat as well. And there's other places, quite local, which you can use. But maybe you don't want to go on an organised retreat. Maybe it's not actually possible for you to do that. And there are good reasons why people can't do things like that, family commitments and things like that. So what could you do instead? Here's a few suggestions. Go for a walk. Use that time when you're walking to focus on God, to ask God to direct you. I quite enjoy going for a walk, especially when there's a coffee shop at the end of it. You know, walk a mile in my shoes, you'll end up in a coffee shop. And one of the things I do in the coffee shop, I take a book with me. And I'm in good company with this because I've been reading some of Pete Gregg's books, and he does exactly the same thing. He takes a devotional book with him and he reads it. In his case, he'll have a meal, he'll have a drink, and he'll read the devotional book. And he'll take a notebook with him and write down anything that God might have to say to him. And I fully recommend that. If you're being inspired by God, make a note of it. And then you can review it later. When you've read that devotional book, maybe a chapter or so, when you're walking back, think about what you've been reading. You could also find a church or a cathedral which is open, or visit a place of spiritual significance, and use that time to pray and be still. I brought a book with me that was written by the British Pilgrim Trust, which explains, tells you about various sites around the country which you can actually go to pray, to retreat to. And it gives you a little bit of information about it. And it's good to find out the story of something that happened in those places, because you can use that as your focus, that something in that story might inspire you to think about something that God might be wanting to say to you. As I said, again, keep a book handy, keep a notebook handy. Just jot down anything that inspires you. Of course, what I've talked about there is a retreat by yourself. It's also possible to go and retreat with others. In fact, retreat could be done as part of church life. You've got an opportunity to retreat in our church every Tuesday night at the prayer meeting. Some people might say, oh, prayer meeting's boring. How do you know if you've never been? Or maybe you're just basing your experience on something that happened 20 years ago. I fully encourage you to go. There's life groups, house groups. These are places where you can explore ideas and passages from the Bible and get to know God a little bit more in that setting. And you're doing that with other people, not just on your own. There's also our Sunday services. Sunday services can sometimes be quite busy at the end with everybody milling around, discussing things. But a little suggestion for you. You've worshipped, you've heard somebody speak. Take a few moments at the end to just sit quietly by yourself and think about what you've heard. And obviously give other people that same opportunity. You know, don't just think, right, I've had my couple of minutes now, I'll go and ask such and such a person some question. It might take them a little bit longer. Just be sensitive. Somebody else might be thinking about what they've been hearing. One of the services that I've get a lot of benefit from in the last few months is what we call the Heart of Worship services. I know Gina has a massive heart for this, because the desire that she has is that we get to know God on a deeper and deeper level. And this is the aim of the Heart of Worship service. At least this is my interpretation, what I think he's saying. If I'm misrepresenting anybody here, Dan can beat me up afterwards. But I'm sure, I think I'm right in saying that. Yeah. Very helpful. You've got that time to reflect, time to worship, time to just stop and listen. What is God saying to me? So what's the point? What's the point of retreat? Over the last few months, I've been taking a look at various different things. And one of the things that's really impressed me and inspired me over the last few months is the monastic movements in history. I've taken a look at the Desert Fathers. These were people who withdrew in the very early days of Christianity into the deserts of Egypt, Palestine, and Syria. Some of them did some very strange things. A man called Abba Pebo, one of the Desert Fathers, he kept a pebble in his mouth for 6 years to learn the value of silence. I'm not recommending that to anybody. Simeon Starlights, he spent 10 years on the top of a 20-foot high column. That was his way of retreating. After 10 years, of course, he came to his senses and decided to build one that was 60 foot tall and spent the next 30 years living on top of that. He certainly drew a crowd. I thought to myself, when I was reading about that, I thought to myself, I wonder what would happen if I set up a column on Booth's car park and sat on top of it. I don't think I'd be there for 10 years. I don't think it'd be that long before some people were gently leading me down and taking me away for medical examination, mental examination. But it might have attracted a crowd for the wrong reasons to begin with, but after a while, people saw that this man was actually seeking God in doing what he was doing. And they came to him and they got wisdom from him. And they got inspiration from him. Somebody that has inspired me quite a bit is the story of St. Cuthbert. And St. Cuthbert was based in Northumbria. And he did some pretty strange things at times. On one occasion, he waded out into the North Sea to pray. Held his hands out in the shape of a cross and waded out up to his neck. Now, those of you who have been up to the northeast will know that the North Sea is not exactly warm. This is a very strange thing. And the monk, one of the monks in the monastery, actually followed him one night because they were getting a bit concerned. Why was Cuthbert coming home every morning soaking wet? So he followed him to see what he did. And he was horrified. This monk was actually horrified by what he saw. Now, I don't know why Cuthbert did it, but apparently St. David in Wales also did the same thing. And St. David did it to suppress urges that men get. I won't go into any details, sexual urges that men get. And I won't say any more than that. But that's why St. David did it, apparently. The cold of the water suppressed his desires. And he wanted to focus his prayers on God. And put out to one side anything else that was happening. Now, I'm not suggesting we do that either. Despite the strangeness that some of these people did, many of them left inspirational quotes and stories which still inspire today. In Europe, monasticism was a major factor in the evangelization of Europe. If you read about how Christianity spread across Europe, you'll find that quite often there's a monastery involved somewhere in that story. It's certainly true of England. When Augustine of Canterbury and Paulinus were sent from Rome, they established monasteries and places of worship. They established the worship of God first, and then they evangelized. And that's what happened in the north of England when Aidan came to Lindisfarne. He established the worship of God first. They were central in the idea that they would just be to one side and focus on God and be rooted and deepened in that relationship with God. And that's the point. We need to be rooted in God in order to serve. And taking that time out to be with Him, we can learn what God wants for us. But most of all, we can deepen that relationship with God. Take time to listen. As Dan comes back to finish our service, just take moments while we're praising, while we're worshipping, to reflect and just ask a question. What do you want, Lord, to say to me? Amen.